Welcome to episode 12 of Liberty.me's Bourbon Bitches. You can find this interview more at our site and also at the YouTube channel. My name is Tiffany Madison, Vice President of Coin Congress and co-founder of Creative Destructors. Tonight I am joined by my other two awesome co-hosts because the ladies are off tonight. Miss Olivia, also known as Liberty Nerd, and you can check out her Facebook page. And Kevin Ryan, co-host of our brother show, Beer and Bastards, also captain of the Facebook page Unbiased America, is with us. And Mr. Antonio Bueller, founder of Peaceful Streets Project and Brom Education, is also with us this evening. What are you guys drinking?
Well, I already drank my little cup of tea. I told you I drink tea.
Nonsense. What is this tea? Come on. Come on. All right, so Olivia's not going to let us roofie her tonight. We'll accept it. There you go. Kevin?
You all can drink double pump.
Absolute. On the rocks.
Nice.
A little bit of water.
Antonio, after your day today, please tell me you're at least having a beer.
Oh no, what happened? Water.
Oh yeah, either. Oh, come on! Kevin and I are the only one partaking? Shame on you guys. That's okay, that's alright. We forgive you. So, let's jump in. Obviously we wanted to talk about...
Oh no!
Awesome. Okay. Sorry about that. Sometimes my internet just decides to hate me. I also probably should have made sure my husband's off Wi-Fi. And me too. Anyway, so getting back to it, police brutality. So for those of you who aren't aware, Antonio has been in a fight for many years against the Austin Police Department after false charges were filed against him for allegedly spitting on an officer. Pretty much an entire charade that was pretty much trumped up because they were caught red-handed actually breaking the law and violating his constitutionally protected speech. To make it worse, they were arresting a passenger, also violating her rights, dragged her out of the car in heels because she was calling her mom and the driver was being arrested. They put her in an awful, painful hold. She was screaming for someone to film it. Antonio was a DD that night, totally sober, just pumping gas at a gas station when he began to film. A nonsensical circus followed, and I believe the end result was a $1 fine, which just shows you what a mockery the system is of itself. He later founded Peaceful Streets Project and rallied people to film police based on scanner reports. And the corrupt Austin Police Department did not like that, so they continued to slap charges on him, threaten, harass the protesters, all for constitutionally protected activities. I wanted to kind of get in, Antonio, not to drag it back to Ferguson, but police brutality has actually been a topic of discussion with increased frequency. I remember talking to you years ago when this first went down, and you organized Peaceful Streets Project because you were alarmed by how citizens didn't talk about these issues, didn't really take an active role in filming the police. There wasn't really a local grassroots organization dedicating to actually tracking the activities of the bad officers. Since Ferguson and since there's been a marked increase of public conversation about the militarization of law enforcement, do you feel like there is maybe a cultural awakening, a cultural consciousness changing? And do you see that shifting anywhere closer to actual reform of what these officers are allowed to do?
Well, I definitely think that there's that we're reaching some sort of inflection point, and with most inflection points, it can go the right way or it can go the wrong way. I think that we're getting close to some sort of general understanding or evolution within our society that will move us away from accepting police abuse within the greater society, hopefully. But as far as reform, I don't know if that's the case. I don't think that we're any closer to the police reforming themselves or any sort of external agencies coming in and reforming the police. But I do believe that we may be getting closer to people just getting fed up with police abuse and starting to engage in direct action tactics.
That's good. That's good. And Kevin and Olivia, I know that you both are obviously libertarian. So what is your thought and opinion on situations like Ferguson and the very heavy militarization where you have extremely small towns with zero necessity for giant, ridiculous tanks and 50 caliber weapons? And we saw in Ferguson the tactical operations that these small town cops have no business playing with these toys use were embarrassingly poor. So what do you think? Do you think obviously there is a rise of military or of militarization? Do you think that the conversations that are taking place and hopefully will increase, are a good thing? Do you think that the issue is overblown because it's so publicly, show trial essentially in some cases, and also nasty situations like Ferguson getting front lines?
Well, I think one of the things that I took from the whole Ferguson incident was that it became less about the police and more about blacks and whites, and really took away from what could have been a very powerful moment in America, because instead of talking about the abuses of power that are being inflicted upon Americans, we talked about race relations. Now, obviously, there's a racial component to it, but I've looked at the numbers, and when you actually look at the statistics of whether or not there's a bias against black people from the police, if you break it down by the amount of arrests that take place in the African American community versus the white community, there's no bias. In fact, whites get shot more often per arrest than blacks do. And it's one of those things that you don't see in the numbers because there are so many more arrests of blacks. And because of that, there's the illusion that there's a racial component that's occurring in America right now. The real problem isn't one of race. It's an overall situation. There's a problem of police violence that's occurring in America that we probably should not be talking about in terms of the racial component. And I think we missed a little bit of an opportunity to discuss that because people turned this into a black versus white issue.
Yeah, I'm with Kevin on that. I viewed the Ferguson issue as more of this happens quite often. And my issue with that is, why is it happening quite often? I mean, we have this issue with blacks versus white. We have this issue where we have the militarization of the police. It's awful. Like, why do we have to have these tanks? As you said, Tiffany, why do we have to have these tanks going to little tiny towns and causing all this ruckus? I mean, it costs money. Why are we doing it? It's stupid. And I kind of echo everything that Kevin said. The numbers point to it. There are issues that are they're all over the country, and this particular case ended up becoming one about race and not about the militarization of the police. And I think Kevin's right that we absolutely missed a big turning point in the discussion.
Yeah, I don't know.
Regarding,
I don't know.
The militarization.
I have to disagree. I have to disagree with both of those points. So the reason why it became a race issue was because Ferguson had very, very deep racial issues that manifested themselves in the way that the police were treating the black community in Ferguson. The racial makeup of the police force and the application of the laws and the application of police violence was disproportionate on the black community. And then immediately afterwards, the people of Ferguson rallied and demanded justice. They demanded attention. And then they were attacked by the police. And then nationwide, you had a bunch of people siding with the police, pushing out sayings such as "pants up, don't loot," calling Michael Brown a thug, slandering him in death, and doing it in a way which was very racially tinged at very least, but very racially motivated, I believe, by a lot of people in this country who want to make it about a black and white thing, particularly when they can vilify a young black male if that person happens to be a victim of the police. So I actually disagree. I think that race was a very, very serious component, of this, from the way that the police acted all the way to the way that the national, white America in general acted. I don't think that we can pretend that it's not a race issue. And when it comes to statistics, I'd like to see where it says whites get shot more than blacks, because blacks get stopped more than whites, even when they commit the same amount of crimes. They get arrested more.
Well, I think
they get beat more.
He froze there for a
they
second,
get
but
prosecuted more.
I'll tell you the statistics I have,
and they get heavier penalties.
and these come from the government. In terms of the amount of people who are killed by police, among the white population, there's 1 death per 818 violent crimes committed by white people. For black people, there's 1 death. In other words, there's 1 black person shot dead by police for every 1,455 violent crimes. In other words, white people are getting killed more often per violent crime that they commit than black people. And you have to adjust it in terms of, well, how often are the police confronting blacks versus whites? And obviously, if you adjust it by the amount of crimes committed, whites are actually getting shot by police more often. I just don't think there's a racial component to it.
Okay, so
can you guys hear him?
I'm telling you right now that the numbers that you just gave clearly are biased, because blacks get arrested a lot more than whites. They're going to get charged a lot more than whites. And so are those numbers adjusting for that? If you're an inner city black male in Philadelphia versus a poor white person in southern Missouri, you're just going to get arrested a lot more times in your life than the white person. So to say that whites get shot for half as many of the crimes
in your specific case too, Antonio, you brought up a very, very compelling point. If you weren't from a nice family, a veteran, a West Point grad, and you were instead an inner city minority with no resources to mobilize or start a grassroots effort or even defend yourself in court so aggressively, the felony charge that was leveraged at you for spitting on an officer, something that you were only saved from by someone recording across the street, you would be in prison. So I think that despite what government statistics may show, I literally have seen, and this is not just my personal bias, but I have literally seen throughout my life very glaring examples of people immediately looking at the minority in the room is kind of a sense of institutionalized racism. And cops do the same thing. They definitely have to police really nasty neighborhoods that have been more, basically financially oppressed and exploited for a long period of time by various different means, mostly at the hands of the state. And there is, I think, a form of institutional racism that absolutely infects the police departments all around this country. I don't know if you guys live in the South, but I do, and I've seen that very, very often. The data, though, and where you actually get that data from is interesting to me, because I can't imagine that statistics, maybe we need some external, content or data from a nonprofit or something to back that up, because I really cannot imagine that whites are shot or harassed by cops more than African Americans. That's mystifying to me. I would be interested to hear where you got that. Yeah, sorry, you were off camera.
Well, can I just respond for a second? There's numerous sources to verify this. But I will say, take them with a grain of salt, because there is no complete record of police shootings in America, which is staggering. The police are not forced to keep records of how often they shoot citizens. There's no central database. On the other hand, in terms of records of how many police get shot, there is numbers going back to 1783 or something. And the state that they have statistics on how they were shot, who they were shot by, where they were shot. I mean, the tiniest little data is being kept, but nothing. We don't even know how many citizens are being shot by police. So when I quote these statistics for you, understand they come from the government. So I don't know if they're true or not, but they do show.
Yeah, I'll put up an actual
per arrest as well. Whites are shot more often than blacks.
Right, and blacks are arrested a lot more than whites, even when they commit the same amount of crimes. You know, we know this just from the drug war. Blacks are arrested at multiples of what whites are arrested for, even though they have the same rates of drug use and drug dealing. So to use that as the measure, as the denominator, is, you know, it just doesn't seem like.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. I think I'm having an internet lag. I actually posted up in the chat a Google document that is a crowdsourced project documenting all police shootings all across the country. And it's based on media reports. It's backlinked and sourced. It's actually very, very fascinating. And a lot of times, and actually the majority of what I'm seeing is unknown. The media reports very rarely indicate the race of the individual, which I guess that would be even to protect their identity, but it is really hard to track that. And the fact that it's not expected, I mean, I'm looking at this sheet, shots fired, 6, 10, 7, 8, I mean, 16, Jesus Christ. Am I a better shot than cops with their poor training? Than someone that actually has a badge and enforces the law? That concerns me as well. I think lowering these standards that they did, both for admissions and training, and then giving them heavy, like really heavy, crazy weapons and a total free license to not track any of this data has created a very institutional problem. And I do think that minority communities do get the brunt of that in many, many cities, especially big cities and inner cities, because they can't fight back. So if you have a quota and you want to make that quota, why wouldn't you pull up and harass that person and give them a ticket? Well, what if they have pot on them and they run from you? Now you literally can shoot them in the back. It happens all the time. I see more dogs and individuals getting shot under suspicious circumstances than should ever be allowable in a free society that professes to respect justice. So yeah, that concerns me dearly. What do you guys think about body cameras? I have heard two sides of this argument. One side of the argument is obviously that they should wear them. If you can afford heavy weapons and crazy military-style equipment, like you want to go out and play war in the streets, you can afford, and your department can afford, body cameras. And you could stream actual real time, and some statistics show that it cuts down significantly on accidental shootings and accidental police, people that come back and report police brutality drastically drop in areas where they wear body cameras. On the other side of the argument, there are many officers that feel very uncomfortable by institutional quotas, and they often let people go for things because it's just stupid. It's, you know, they pull you over, you were going 10 miles over the speed limit, they've already met their quota, there's no reason to harass you, they don't want to do the paperwork, so they let you go. If they wear a body camera without the quota system being reformed, how does that actually change leniency that cops can often give in situations like that? Is it a pro or is it a con?
Well, I've heard both. I've heard both sides too. And oddly enough, when I first heard this issue, I felt like it's a pro. You know, it's obviously the more accountable you are, the more you can see of the actions of a police officer, the more you'll know what actually happened in any given incident. But then I start hearing from the libertarian and the anarchist community that this is a negative, because now you have the federal government telling the states and the local communities what to do. And they're like, okay, Well, we can't have that. I don't want them coming and telling us that we got to buy more cameras for our policemen, and that's going to be all sorts of money. That's an unfunded mandate and so forth. So that's the divide I've heard. I don't agree with the issue about spending on the federal level. I think that it's a good thing. Anytime you have an eyes on what's occurring, it's a good thing. Of course, the other side of the argument is, well, the police control that. So let's just say there's a beating or something, and suddenly that police camera didn't work, or they lost the evidence in the evidence locker. The best thing that keeps police accountable are citizens who are willing to watch, who are willing to take a photograph or a video of an arrest that's happening. And I think that's the only way that you're going to see. I mean, some of the biggest crimes that police have committed, Rodney King, for example, the first big bad one that was committed and caught on camera. That wasn't captured by that wasn't police saying we did it. That was people sending in their video of a police crime. I think that has to keep happening.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I am pro body cameras, and I'm pro them because I also think that citizens should be able to also film the police as well. I think it should go both ways. I think it's a two-way street. Because that would prove, because I heard about your case, Antonio, where there was the only way that you were able to get through it was that evidence from a witness. So, let's say you were able to show your own, your own film, then maybe all that stuff wouldn't have happened. But I would think that if you're able to have a body camera, and if the police are able to have a body camera, you can put them both together. You can see which one do they match up? Is there something wrong with it? I'm okay using it, so I think it helps generally just trying to cut down the crap that's going on. I think they get away with too much.
By the way, I think Antonio can only hear Kevin. Antonio, can you hear me?
Just do it.
Yeah, I asked him to refresh. He couldn't hear us. Damn it. Okay. I mean, many officers I know are former firefighters, soldiers, Marine, airmen, sailors. I mean, second-generation immigrants, corn-fed white boys from flyover country, bullied grown men, angry, violent sociopaths. I mean, there's and then honorable career cops. There's dirty cops. There's rapists, child molesters, wife beaters, all in that mixture because they're a reflection of all the different elements of human society. What really bothers me is poor training, obviously, the lack of accountability, and it's not the good cops I fear. It's those that get away with shooting a teenager unnecessarily, a dog in cold blood. Those bad cops are out there, and they hurt people generally without consequences. I would like to see a return to the peace officer, someone who diffuses situation, someone who is actually involved in their society, that polices the streets to mitigate conflict and crime, not shoot first and ask questions later. That really bothers me. And especially when you have, near rural law enforcement institutions that have and will continue to be armed with paramilitary equipment which one day may be tasked with enforcing unjust laws in the event of civil disorder. That lack of mentality of accountability really concerns me. I think it's a huge institutional problem. And until that's actually addressed, I really can only see it escalating. I do like that the New York Police Department, in response to the Eric Garner situation, actually came out and said, we're only going to enforce laws that are actually necessary. And there was a drastic reduction in arrests. Why are you policing for things that really shouldn't be criminal? And a lot of people say, well, officers can't use, jurisdiction, essentially. They're there to enforce the law. But if stupid-ass laws are made in the first place with no accountability for the politicians, and these are the enforcers, they become tax collectors. They become tax collectors for the state, not peace officers, which is where the original institution was essentially designed to do. So that concerns me. What do you guys think would actually have to take place in order to get any sort of reform in this area?
I don't believe reform is possible. I think that we're too far along, quite honestly. I think that we have developed within our culture this notion that police officers are to use violence in order to control people and in order to deal with people that we don't want to have to deal with. I think that there are some countries where police officers haven't gone down that route, so they don't have to reverse that. In places such as Norway. I think that the only way that we can really reform the system is if we get people to actively revolt against the system, not violently, but in terms of just refusing to associate with police officers, refusing to accept their services, refusing to allow them in their communities. And we're very far away from that. But if communities stop serving police officers, as in if you're wearing a uniform, you're not allowed to come into my store, you're not allowed to come into my restaurant, you're not allowed to come into my gas station. If people would start ridiculing and ostracizing police officers who commit crimes and who mistreat the public, then I think that we might be able to do it. But I think that we're too far along to ever try to get the police officers that they have in some of the Western and Northern European countries, like that type of attitude amongst the police. I just think it's too far along.
Well, I have a question, Antonia, that I'm actually genuinely interested in asking. Do you think, because my uncle was actually, he's a retired cop from Los Angeles, and he was a very respected cop, and he never had any issues. Do you think maybe it's a generational thing? Do you think maybe now there's been too much of a power grab? Because my uncle's in his 60s right now. So do you think it's just become a generational thing?
Yeah, let me just add to that for 1 second. My grandfather, born in 1902, he died in the late 80s, was a police officer. And he didn't, I don't think he carried a gun for most of his career. And he was in one of the worst sections of Hartford, Connecticut. And it was just a whole different atmosphere back then.
Yeah, so I think one thing that we could actually do, one reform that I would be comfortable with, is actually disarming the police. I think that would change things radically. If they were forced to actually interact with people, talk to people, reason with people, and not have a tool on their belt that they could quickly use as compliance or to kill people, I think that would be a positive. As far as the generational thing, the one thing I've learned is that a lot of the police officers learn from the older cops. They learn how to plant drugs. They learn how to write reports. They learned, what the good old boy network was from the older people. With mass incarceration, with the focus on filling the prisons, with the drug war, obviously the incarceration rate has gone up a lot. The arrest rate has gone up a lot. And so I think that police officers in this generation are expected to go out and make arrests, whereas in previous generations, they weren't expected to go out and make arrests all the time. But previous generation also had their issues as well, with regards to dealing with, to get it back on the race thing, dealing with blacks, dealing with Native Americans before that, like with the Texas Rangers. And through all this time, they've dealt with the undesirables with regards to homelessness and mental illness. And so I'm not going to say that the older generation is to blame for everything that's happening today. I think that we have a lot of problems in today's police force, but it's not like there was a golden era when police were somehow good and they didn't do some really bad things. The history of policing, particularly in the South.
That's definitely true for the South. And what concerns me, again, as someone questioned my premise that there's poor training, when you have soldiers in war that are trained in counterinsurgency, who have spent the time patrolling streets of Baghdad or Kandahar, where local nationals are often allowed fully automatic AK-47s, they understand firsthand how important it is to gain and maintain the trust of these communities. I had a friend who wrote a really, really good op-ed about how officers, though all these departments are receiving these weapons and equipment from the military and they are training with them and they're really doing whatever they can to make sure the officers understand how to use these weapons, breaching and clearing and kinetic activities, they haven't received the military's training on how to avoid using these applications first. Especially in the special operations community, you have non-lethal approaches to crowd control. I mean, we saw it in Ferguson. I watched live as entire streams of cops ordered people to turn off their phones. I mean, as they tear gassed and rubber bullet peaceful protesters. These were not the people robbing and looting. I watched them live. So of course the media portrays it as all these crazy people burning down. Those were in isolated enclaves. They weren't all of the people in 4 different protests across the city being confronted with military vehicles, tear gas, heavy armor and training like these guys are playing war, like it's a fucking game. You don't react to a peaceful protest scenario with full militarization. You need to train your officers, if you're going to have all this paramilitary equipment, to actually understand the basic tactics of peaceful crowd control. And you know what, if you're an officer of the law and you're paid by my tax dollars and there's a protest because people are pissed, it's your job to sit there and listen. It's your job to sit there, and sometimes people might yell things that hurt your feelings. That doesn't mean that you react instantly by beating them with a club. And that's what I saw. And that's a breakdown of a departmental values framework all across the country. That really bothers me. And until there's some actual consultation, I don't know, with people who understand actual crowd control from a non-aggressive stance. I mean, again, soldiers in war can't just go firing willy-nilly into Iraqi crowds that are throwing shoes at them. Do our police officers not have even a less contained ROE than soldiers in war? I mean, that really should concern people, especially if you're going to arm them with 50 cals. Remember the guy on the top of the gun doesn't even know how to use this heavy equipment, pointing it at an entire crowd of peaceful protesters. That's provocation. You show up to keep the peace in full military gear, that obviously pisses the crowd off more. So it's basic, and Radley Balco's book, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, really delved deeply into this because he went back to the old school officers that reacted to the Seattle protests and reacted to these really, really intense protest movements and aggressively policed and set that standard that's now been adopted as the status quo. Boston bombing is a great example. That's an institutional problem. And better training might help, but private policing is something that a lot of people bring up. And like Antonio said, I do have to agree with you. I don't think that we're ready for that. But if that solution were ever to present itself, what type of societal conditions would actually have to take place in order to make the way for private policing? I mean, would you have to have a total civil breakdown and disorder, and then people step up and organize to police their own communities? I mean, I can't imagine any scenario where private policing would actually work in the future. And that's such a libertarian solution. What do you guys think?
Or would it ever actually be a scenario that would take place? I mean, at what point did the police cease to exist so that we have to fill their slot with somebody who is from a private, I mean, actually, wasn't there something in Detroit recently where there was a private security company took part in
yeah, from what I understand, that's correct. I didn't follow that issue very intimately, but from what I understand, there were no police officers. So people were organizing amongst themselves to police their own community. Does anybody else know the details on that?
And does that avoid abuse? Does that avoid the issue of abuse that happens with government sector police? I mean,
yes.
Is there a difference between a private security force and a public security force?
I think there is. First off, I don't think private policing is a solution, but I think that there is a big difference. The big difference is that if you hire policemen and they do something really bad, if they violate someone's right or kill them, they're personally liable and you're personally liable. They don't have, they're not covered or qualified immunity. They don't have that. And I think that's a really big piece of it. The second thing is that those private security forces have to serve their customers. And granted, the customers may not always be the best people, and they may not always have the best motives. But with the police, they have no customers. They can basically do what they want as long as they don't step on the toes of the rich or the political class. And so if a poor community did have a private police force, I would imagine that there would be a lot less, crimes against that community by their own police force than by the current status quo.
I'm actually worried. I've heard some people talk about having even a nationalized police force. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's insane. It kind of reminds me of in the Hunger Games, and you have the Capitol people come in and they go in all the different districts and they're burning everything down. Like, that's exactly what would happen because they're being run by the government. And it's what's happening right now. And so I'm seeing all these different things happening in different cities and in different situations. And all I can think about is how you see it in the media.
Yeah, I don't know. I think different
even in
communities
Hollywood,
need
no
to
one's doing anything
experiment
about it.
with
No
different solutions.
Where
Again,
do we go from here?
the beat cop that actually knows his community, to me is much more desirable to the county asshole who works for a union. I mean, breaking up the unions, which is such a powerful institution, it's such a pipe dream, but breaking up the unions through some sort of massive controversy that really brings eyes and attention on what we have going on is something that I can only imagine would help the situation. And that's got to be like, okay, holy shit, the people are getting pissed. We should probably revise the way that we're doing things because it's going to threaten all of the rest of us. I mean, having one of those, protectionist unions go down because of corruption or nonsense will go a long way, I think. But I really can't imagine. There's such a close, incestuous relationship between the unions and the local media, oftentimes, and the politicians that protect the cause. I mean, they're really protecting each other, and you see it as an instant smear campaign. And it's kind of interesting because if you compare the Michael Brown situation versus Trayvon Martin, not getting into any details or anything like that, which, by the way, I do want to address really quick. Kayaking Jeff had mentioned that the scenario that the cop in Ferguson said was backed up by physical evidence. I think you need to do a little more research on that because you are incorrect. The person who actually did the analysis wasn't even fucking accredited. So let's actually get our facts straight. I'll be happy to send you a link on that as well. Of course, you don't hear about that in the news, but he had no business speaking as a spokesperson on behalf of that entire forensics community when he didn't even have credentials. He lied about it, and no one ever talks about that. But anyway, and also the gun was wiped off. It wasn't taken from him. There were no pictures. There's no blood splatter. So let's not be lazy if we're gonna form really passionate opinions. But one of the things that I would like to see, especially with this anarchist argument that private policing is the answer, is some more creative solution, because that is constantly what I hear. We need, and Antonio brought up a really good point, they're serving their customer. Their customer becomes a corporation. I watched this Vice documentary about private security forces, and I know several combat veterans who have secured pretty lucrative jobs working overseas for corporations protecting powerful people when they go to shitty countries and they're nervous or scared or there's some sort of controversy. Instituting that on a citywide scale, it concerns me extremely. How would private policing allegedly work in an anarchist society just because the private organizations are competing? Somehow the best one would get control of a community? I mean, I don't understand that. And maybe someone can answer that for me, because that's something that really, really nags me when it comes to anarchist arguments. No? Antonio?
Well, I'm not an anarchist, so I don't know.
The anarchists are going to always have a tough time putting in place their visions because number one, it hasn't happened. It, and when it does happen, it's not for long. So it's tough to argue what an anarchist would do and whether or not it will actually work. But there are solutions that are occurring in the public or in the private industry, such as security forces that are not paid for by the government. I mean, there's a whole lot of solutions that are possible.
That's true. That's very, very, very true.
Whether or not the public accepts them.
Yeah. So another thing too that we've got to, I know we talked about body cameras, but I'm interested. Do you think that body cameras would expand the surveillance state? I mean, imagine this is a really good question. Thank you, Jeremy. He has a series of really good questions, and we'll try to get through. We usually start the Q&A portion with about 20 minutes left or so, and we're right at that, so that's good.
That's a good question.
So body cameras expanding the police state. You have to imagine that you are the victim of a violent crime or something very, very traumatic has just happened to you. And Antonio, we're discussing the question up at the top about whether body cameras would expand the surveillance state. I can imagine that you would be in a situation of extreme adrenaline and hysteria at some points. One of the first things my lawyer ever told me, because this household is very heavily armed and I've pulled my firearm to defend myself twice in my life, is the first thing you do is call me. Do not talk to the police first, because what you say is recorded and it will be used against you because your adrenaline's pumping, you're full of crazy emotions, you just did something that you're afraid you're going to get into legal trouble, or the trauma or the emotion or the chaos, the crazy of whatever just happened. I mean, imagine having an invader in your house and you just shot him and the cops show up five minutes later. You're literally putting yourself in a situation where on live feed camera, in recording forever, that is direct evidence of not necessarily your guilt, but of your emotional state, which can be drastically misconstrued in the court of law, especially at the hands of like an aggressive DA or something like that. That is an interesting question to me because I think body cameras are extremely useful in certain situations. However, it does beg the question, do you have a situation where you are creating this constant monitoring of any and all interactions with police and citizens in often really, really fucked up situations? I mean, what do you guys think? Because that's a really interesting question.
I think that we just have to come to the realization that we're entering a very different era, with regards to privacy. With Google Glass, people walking around doing that, people having cell phone cameras everywhere,
Is that still a thing?
What's that?
Is Google Glass still a
Oh,
thing?
yeah. I just read about a startup that, has raised millions of dollars because they're going to give Google Glass to doctors. Yeah, so, but I think that the notion of privacy in public is something that we as a society are just going to have to come to realize it doesn't exist anymore. If you're in public, you just don't have a lot of privacy. I would like to see if there's going to be body cams, the police should not control them. I know this is going off on a tangent, but they should not control them. It should go to a third-party server, where the police have no ability to turn the cameras off or to delete the cameras or videos or lose them, which is the biggest problem with police cameras.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, police cameras are only as good as the people that view the footage that's being captured, and it's one of those things that you need to have good oversight if it's going to work. It's a lot of money too. I mean, don't forget there's millions. I mean, there's a ton of police in America. So if every one of them is wearing a camera, that's a lot of money. That's a big deal. And as much as I like the concept,
That's true.
That's taking a lot of money away from what could be in other segments of society, education or whatever. And it's just something you have to consider before you just throw down a blanket, okay, let's do it.
I could find the money. If we fired half the police officers, we could equip the rest with cameras.
Oh, I could find the money too, trust me. There's a lot of ways that I could cut.
Awesome. Well, if you guys want to take some questions, we already did one, but it would be good to actually get to a couple more of these. A little off topic. What do you guys think about immigration? Should the U.S. open its borders?
I'm all for it. Open the borders. Let everyone in.
Yeah, but what happens to the fact that people come in and they weren't paying into the system and now they're getting from the system? I mean, that's what most people who are anti-immigrant will say, is that they weren't paying into the system. How can they come in and suddenly benefit from the system?
Well, first off, I don't know of many immigrants that come over when they're 65. Most of them are young and they're going to be working. But the biggest people who suck off of the taxpayer are actually Americans, not immigrants. Most immigrants are very hardworking and and they actually give a lot more in taxes and take out a lot less than their American counterpart. But I'm not talking from a fiscal perspective. I'm not talking about just the dollars and cents. Do they put in more than they take out? I just believe that people should be free, and I don't think that people should be bound to the nations that they happen to be born in. And I don't think they should have to wait for years trying to get visas, gain permission just to cross borders. The big problem would be is if the United States had open borders and no one else did. Of course, that would create quite an imbalance. But I think in the long run, the U.S. would benefit greatly from doing so. And if you're going to take the free market perspective, human capital is just as important as money and goods being able to pass through borders, and I think humans should be able to as well.
My stepdad actually came over here from Germany, and he came over here when he was 20. And the reason why he came here was because there were more opportunities for aerospace engineering than there were in Germany. So he came here, and it took him about 15 years to get through the lotto system and get his citizenship. And I remember it was just a couple of years ago he was able to get it, and he finally voted in his first election in 2008. And I think the system is just messed up because you have to wait and wait for your number to be called in a lotto system if you go through it that way. And it's just a pain in the freaking ass. Like, if I was an immigrant and I was trying to come over here, I would get my green card and I'd get whatever I could in order to actually work here and make a living. But it's like you're playing a waiting game the whole time. It's just awful. I don't think they should be subject to waiting at least that long. I think if you want to come here, you should be able to. But it's just the system, the way it is right now, is
yeah. But if you had a system
up.
where anybody could enter the United States that wanted to, we would go from 300 million to 1 billion.
Yeah, but so America has a lot of.
There's got to be a system.
So America has a lot of open spaces. I have a couple of European friends that have traveled to the States from places like Spain or Amsterdam or Italy, and where it's very compact. Their cities are just, and so are our big cities too. But their areas of countryside, all of the property is owned. The majority of the West is owned by the government. I mean, we talk about this massive influx, and I'm sure that's also directed to unfettered third world immigration, but there is a lot of space in this country that is drastically underutilized. If you've ever driven that awful, awful drive through West Texas or the Midwest, you know this. I mean, there's a ton of land here. I do think that there should be some sort of vetting process for disease control, crime control, all that other stuff. I do not think the federal government should be responsible for that. I think it reinforces their control of the borders, which are just imaginary lines. I think that the states, if anything, should be able and be empowered to do that. And the states that actually allow immigration and embrace it, if the theory is correct, would thrive more than those who did not. And then those states would be forced to reform their policy, having just to compete. I mean, I think states should compete for you. Lowest taxes, best service, efficiency. I mean, there is obviously that state bureaucracy in a nutshell, but you should be able to have a system at least controlled by the community in your most localized form that determines who can come in, because it is a situation where you do have to have some sort of vetting process. However, the system that we have right now is so wholly broken, and involving the federal government even more in trying to fix the problem that they created in the first place is laughable at best. Half of the people that I know literally cannot come here because they are on a 10-year fucking wait list. That's insane. And if you just come here illegally, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Why in the hell would I be separated from my family, waiting for some government bureaucrat to put a stamp on a paper when I could just come across the border? I mean, fuck you. Why would I wait this long? I mean, some people are literally, like you were giving that great example. Oh, why would some people wait 10, 15 years to just get the ability to become a citizen? I mean, if you have no diseases and can pass a basic understanding of how our freaking our government processes work, which I don't even agree with, but why we have a government, you might as well make sure that people who are going to have the right to vote know how the hell to use it, or how to actually, vote appropriately, because you understand the very basic fundamentals, which, on a side note, most Americans can't pass that citizenship test, so there you go. But, I mean, some vetting process, I think, is necessary, but I think our current position on immigration is so antiquated and ludicrous that we are literally creating the problem that we're bitching about. And then Washington comes in with the solutions that they bitch and complain and go back and forth with for 10, 15, 20 years, and nothing ever gets done. That is the central problem to me, is that the federal government is involved in this decision-making process to begin with. Do you guys agree?
To piggyback, yeah, but to piggyback really quick on what you said about the citizenship test, I'm really into education because I want to be a teacher, and there's a state, I think it's Arizona, where if you want to graduate, you have to pass the citizenship test. Like, you have to take this test in order to graduate. What do you guys think about that? I know, Antonio, you have a education thing, right? Like, you have a school.
Yeah. First up.
Like, it's very interesting to me.
Yeah. First off, Arizona is ridiculous. I mean, there's just so much bad stuff going on with Arizona.
I
know.
know.
Sheriff Joe is still.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's crazy. One is, citizenship. I can't stand the notion of good citizenship. Good citizenship leads to people justifying and rallying behind horrible atrocities committed by government. And the last people who should be administering any citizenship test should be the government itself. It should be, if you're going to do it, it should at least be like amongst the people to try to uphold some sort of standard. But yeah, no, I think it's horrible, and I think
yeah, my husband's
everything that's coming out.
Yeah, my husband's from Arizona, and I lived there for 8 years. And while I was conservative before I discovered my libertarian perspectives, I was all gung-ho about Sheriff Arpaio and his, take no prisoners, and yeah, put all the people up for trial that haven't been proven guilty in pink underwear and tent camps in the middle of the desert. Now I understand more of the errors of my ways. I think Arizona is such a renegade place that's full of very, very aggressive conservatives that are very hell-bent on protecting their autonomy and their state renegade persona. And so they do pass, the marriage law was a really good example of really, really aggressive conservatism, which is funny because if you go to Scottsdale, Arizona, and you party with half the people that left socialist California to come to Arizona, they're as liberal as the day is long, but they're too busy doing coke and having orgies to actually do anything to reform the system. So, Scottsdale. We have a bunch of other questions, guys. So Jeremy Harding asked if we had ever heard of Detroit Threat Management Systems. That's the actual private institution where I guess they were actually taking care of that stuff. So I posted the link if anybody's interested, because that was a really, really good question. Competing governments lead to ideals of exceptionalism. Agree or disagree? So let's imagine that the federal twat government in Washington suddenly did not exist, and only the states in their current forms existed. And you had Arizona and Texas and New Mexico and California all competing with each other for the citizens that would live in their jurisdiction. Would that lead to exceptionalism, or would you, I mean, pie in the sky, I kind of grand vision there. Do you think that would lead, because you're having these states compete for the people who are actually funding the state through their taxation? Or would that just create a system where you have this mega group of governments that all band together, and then eventually you lead to a Civil War 2.0?
Well, actually, both those scenarios are true, but America was founded on having 50 states compete with each other, and for a long time that worked. You had people moving. That's the thing that a lot of countries around the world don't get about America, is that we can move around as much as we want, and people move to where they want to move to. Now it's expensive. That's the catch, but people go where they can make the most money. They go where the taxes are lowest. They go where the regulations are lowest. They go where they're amongst their own. Whatever reason, they're allowed to go wherever they want to go. And because of that, we've had a system where the states have always tried to accommodate the best people in America. It happens to this day. I mean, New York has a whole thing going on where they're trying to get, low tax. They're trying to lower their tax for certain zones to have companies come in. I live in Connecticut, and our strategy is to try to get rid of all of our business and to try to make sure that that nobody wants to live here, so that everybody leaves, and it's working quite well. But seriously, everybody goes where they need to go, and in America, it used to work. The problem with the federal government is they're making so many rules that minimum wage, for example, everybody's going to the same place. There's no difference between Connecticut and Massachusetts anymore. There's no difference between Connecticut and North Dakota. I mean, I shouldn't say there's no difference, but the differences are being muted. And so I think what we really have to do, like you said earlier, Tiffany, is we have to get back to a situation where local priorities matter, and that people can decide for themselves, and that there's a lot of
and you know where they're going?
Between Connecticut
they're going
and
to
California.
Texas. Woo!
I think people are going to go where there are the most opportunities for them, like plain and simple. Like that's where they're going to go. If a state has more opportunities for them in whatever field they want to do, they're going to go there.
Antonio,
if there
what do you
aren't,
think?
they're not going to go there. I mean, it comes down to that. It's the most basic thing. So that's all I have to say about that topic.
No, there you are. You're good.
He's frozen. Look, he's frozen.
I think that the more options people have, the better. Oh, I'm frozen? Oh. No, I think that the more places that people have to go, the better. I'm not a big fan of states, because I think so many of the states get it so wrong. I'd like to see things broken down much further than the states, but it's definitely better than one monolithic federal government. I think in time,
I agree, and in fact, I was reading the other day that expatriation is at an all-time high. There are more people leaving, giving up their citizenship, and getting out for other opportunities and for other areas of the world, as opposed to dealing with the excessive taxation. Don't even get me started on that because I'm an independent contractor and have to pay my taxes, and it's ludicrous. It is insane. And I think that that is really something that the government is only going to continue to take. They're going to follow the model of Greece because they're idiots, and they're going to continue to feed crony corporatist profits on the backs of the American people who are going to grow increasingly more economically oppressed, and that's when the shit hits the fan. Sorry to be the Debbie Downer here, but that's a reality that I think a lot of people are not looking long term at. It's unfortunate. Lucy wants to know which one of us is the biggest status. I'm going to vote Kevin. She's not. No, Lucy is so awesome. She's sick tonight, which is why she's not here.
An anarchist, I'm the biggest status.
Yeah, she's like, this is bullshit. I want to rage and freaking call everybody out on their nonsense. I love it.
She likes Harry Potter.
Antonio, what are you? What's your ideology?
I'm anti-oppression, so anarchists and I get along pretty well usually, but you know.
Okay, we got a final question from Virginia Xavier. It's a little long one, but it's good. Well. Tell me what you think about the heavily American bias towards libertarianism, given the increasing importance and spread of globalization. Should libertarians really expect to convince people of Milan, Seoul, or Sao Paulo with content that focuses almost always on national issues in the U.S.?
God damn it. BX, you're stalking us. Just
No. And the reason why I say no is I have a friend that's over in Korea right now in Seoul, and he's tried talking to them about libertarian ideas, and like, no, we love Obama, he's great. It's not going to happen over there. They are all up into whatever is going on in their own political ideology, and they're not going to be with it.
No.
So that's what I think about for Seoul.
I think
did I read that wrong or
there's
what?
no wrong reading of VX's question.
I think that you're talking about the American culture.
What were you saying, Antonio?
VX is clinically insane, in my opinion.
I'm trying.
Let me just say one thing. I think that most people, if you take away the identifier libertarian and you take away the politics, most people identify, with libertarian ideals. Most people believe that government shouldn't be telling them what to do, that other people can manage their money better than them, and that other people should be telling them how to live their lives and what their morals should be. I think that most people, tend to sympathize with libertarian values. They tend to even like them. The problem is that, a lot of people who promote libertarian politics are such distasteful people that people don't want to associate with it, or they're tied to their team, whether it be Republicans, Democrats, Socialist Democrats, whatever it is in whatever country it is. And I think that the best way to try to get to people is to actually try to drop the labels and just talk to people one-on-one as humans.
The people in Seoul are so tied down to their political beliefs there. They rely on the government. They love having cameras on every street corner. They don't mind it. They like having the police everywhere. Like, that's just their culture. And so,
yeah, it's interesting. I've been I just took a new position with Coin Congress events, and it is a really interesting premise because we're distributed from all around the world, and the people who have organized it are both American and European, and their entire understanding of libertarianism goes much deeper than American politics. The libertarian movement is like in their heart and in their motivation, in their drive, in how they actually form startups and form organizations. And they're very, very dedicated. These are Europeans, very dedicated to disruption because they experience an incredible level of socialism and an incredible culture that's very almost they admire the government. An anarchist movement in Europe is very, very teeny tiny. It's smaller than it is here. And even in certain enclaves where you see, like in Greece, right, where people, grandmas, you've lost the battle when grandmas are throwing Molotov cocktails at the cops. They have really seen, I think, where America's headed in 10, 15 years in terms of financial gaming by the corporatist system. So much so that they're just like, fuck it, we're going to innovate and use disruptive anything to try to create something new. They're more about creating, less about talking about politics. Politics bores them. I don't think I've been working with these people for 2 months. I've known half of them for 6 months to a year. I don't think we've ever talked about American politics. And some of these people are hardcore anarchists. They want to create shit that matters. So while stuff like, International Students for Liberty Conference is a big, big enclave of African students, Asian students, and people from Europe that fly all the way to DC and are trying to grow the philosophy of freedom under the umbrella of liberty in their own local communities, and they're doing it grassroots and very passionately. But they're building it on the platform of entrepreneurialism and actually encouraging these people to do whatever they can almost to game the system to get out from under financial oppression. And a lot of them want to migrate here because it is freer than what they're usually accustomed to. So I think that there's a lot of impact that can be made amongst the libertarian community, but we have to spread it out. Like we have to, Antonio, I agree with you. You have to talk to people about ideas. I'll give you a second example. My husband's active duty military. We entertain a lot of soldiers and aviators that come here and hang out with us. And a lot of these guys would describe themselves as Republicans. I mean, they watch Fox News. They, they don't like the warmongering of Fox News because they're the people that actually have to go fight them instead of twats like Christina Guilfoyle or Kimberly, whatever her name is, who are like, yeah, we got to go invade every country. Like, they don't really like that angle of it. But the rest of the politics, they fall right under that, so they think. When I talk to them, I identify as a libertarian, but I don't ever preach to them about libertarianism as a concept, and I don't bring up the non-aggression principle. I mean, these are people that are in the military, right? But I talk about fundamental ideas with them that I think most of them agree. Like, I have persuaded many of them to realize they're actually more libertarian than they think. Of course, some would call them sadists. They're more on the minarchist side. But understanding and grasping that your government is owned and operated by a corporate-controlled oligarchy is a really fundamental concept that a lot of people don't connect. So Americans do need to focus on that because we are the preeminent power of the world, allegedly. So we have to focus on American politics, but we can also, when we communicate with people, taper down the rhetoric and taper down the philosophy. The shit that people who you talk to on the street aren't going to get because they weren't born, reading Hayek or Mises or Rothbard. They don't understand those premises because they haven't studied it. So I think a big problem with libertarian communicators isn't necessarily focusing on U.S.-based issues, because I think we have to, especially when talking to Americans, but practicing with Americans on how to tailor your message without the labels. I mean, that was a really good point you made. And if we can do that, that enables us to communicate with people abroad more efficiently and effectively, especially if there's a language barrier. I mean, people from Belgium don't know what neocon is. Like, you have to explain it. Like, the right was co-opted by, you've got to actually explain it in details without depending on labels. And I think that's a big problem that most libertarians, don't want to detach from it. It's like an umbilical cord to the movement. And that's unfortunate because I think it does significantly hamper communication, especially if your goal is to spread these ideas to groups and markets that aren't familiar with them. Yeah, the buzzwords, the obnoxious buzzwords, and the Eurostatus nonsense is really, really detrimental if your concept is mass adoption. So that's good. Yeah, I think we're good to go. We have a ton more questions, but guys, we're running into 9 minutes, and if it usually goes over an hour and 10 minutes, people do not continue to watch, unfortunately, those short attention spans. So Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, for commenting, for asking really, really awesome questions. We all have differing views and differing philosophies, and it was nice to actually mix it up. So thank you guys all for coming and attending. Hope to have you all back at some point. Really, really appreciate it. So sorry my two co-hosts couldn't be here tonight, but they're stirring all the shit in the chat, so that's that we at least feel their presence, so that's great. Again, thank you again. Bourbon and Bitches, episode 12. You can find this awesome video on YouTube under the Bourbon and Bitches account and under Liberty.me. You can check out our website. We are also on Twitter. All those details should be listed on our lovely, lovely little website. Thank you guys so much, and have a great evening. Cheers.
Good night.
See you guys.